It is amazing to me to realise that I've been uploading content to this channel for probably about 18 months now and have never tackled the subject of edge highlighting. However, that changes today. We are going to dive headlong into this topic and get it all figured out. I'm going to provide you with 4 simple steps for which you can approach learning this technique and practicing it. We're going to have your edge highlighting like an heavy metal god by the end of it. But before we get round to that, I am indeed a filthy YouTuber, and thus I must shill myself out first. So do me a solid, and if you like this video, click the like button to let me know that you like it and to get YouTube to show it to more people. You can also subscribe to the channel and you can enable notifications, set them to always on, and you'll be notified whenever I upload new content. Additionally, if you really love what I'm doing here and you want to support the creation of this content, have a look down at the links in the description below where you'll find my Patreon and a bunch of affiliate links where you can support the channel in ways that don't even need to cost you anything extra. Right, shilling aside, let's get stuck in. It's painfully obvious, first of all, to anyone who's even tried edge highlighting, that more so than any other technique, it really asks for a steady hand. And it can be easy, therefore, to think that if you don't have a steady hand, that must mean that you are never going to get good at edge highlighting. But there's definitely some things that you can do. And I collectively bunch all of these together into what I call anchoring, where you ensure that all of the parts of your body that are going to be moving as a result of the painting process are all solidly connected and anchored down to something to prevent shaking. Obviously, the first and largest part is our trunk, our body itself. And we anchor this very conveniently just by being sat down. We're anchored to a chair. So first of all, make sure you're in a comfy chair that you fit in nicely. That's an easy start. But then we also have a bunch of extremities that we also have to take care of, elbows being the first one on the list. I personally have a preference towards only anchoring one of my elbows to the arm of my chair, but that's a comfort thing. You're going to want to experiment and see what works for you. But with your elbows anchored and your wrists against the desk, that then connects your body to the desk, which is stable, by the arms, which is the part that you're trying to stabilise. Next up, your hands, and again, for stability's sake, you're going to want to use a hobby holder here. So with your hand that's holding that hobby holder, you can place that sort of meaty heel part of your hand down on the desk to get a good solid base. And then next up, your brush hand itself wants to then anchor to that steady base that you've made with your other hand. My trick for this is that I usually place the heel of my brush hand over my bunched up fingers of the other hand, so that the brush hand sort of rests there on those fingers. And now finally we need to anchor our actual fingers ourselves, some of the time, not necessarily all of the time. Now the ones on our offhand are kept nicely busy by holding the hobby holder itself, so that's no problem. It's our brush hand we need to think about here. We're going to be moving our brush hand around a lot as we paint, so whenever you find yourself in a position where you can't have your whole brush hand anchored, say to your other hand for example, try and find an anchor using your ring or pinky fingers, or even both, just to take out that last bit of shake. It really does help a lot. And with all of these connected together, we can really do a lot to eliminate shaking. And the bonus is that if we do get jogged, everything kind of moves together. It all sort of moves at the same speed, at the same rate. And so even if you get jogged, you're not necessarily going to make a mistake, providing you're using this technique. As with most techniques, edge highlighting is going to be significantly easier for you to pull off well if you're using paint that's thinned to a good consistency to do it, and brushes that have good geometry to help with it. And I'll be honest, for the paints it can be a little bit abstract, because different colours and different brands are going to want different amounts of thinning. However, the main thing we need to remember here is that flow is the goal. If we can help it though, we still want a single coat application. We don't want to be constantly having to retrace those lines. So with this in mind, we basically run our paints thinner than a layer, but at the same time, as thick as we can bear to have them while still getting good flow. And once you think you have the right consistency, you'll then want to make sure that your brush is damp with water, but loaded fairly lightly with paint. The easiest way I've found to get this right is to take a brush I've just washed and firstly just blot it off on a paper towel. From here we can then go into our paint and load the brush reasonably heavily, but once again, blot off excess on the towel. What we're looking for here is enough paint to saturate the bristles, which is why we initially load heavily to push paint inwards towards the centre bristles, but not so much that we can't perfectly make out the geometry of the brush head. If there's any beads, blobs or boogers of paint on your brush, it's overloaded and needs to be dabbed off more. Now, it's worth understanding before we start here that there are actually two main types of edge highlighting, and we need to understand what they both are, but also where we might want to use them. For purposes of explanation, I'm going to call these additive and reductive, and those are definitely words that I've just made up, but we love buzzwords in miniature painting, so there you go, you've got two new buzzwords to apply to edge highlighting. So firstly, let's tackle additive edge highlights and discuss what they are. First of all, they're definitely the lesser used type of edge highlight. The aim here is that our edge highlight is of a single and consistent line thickness, but that each time we add a lighter shade to it, it gets brighter and more intense toward a point of focus. You'll typically see at least 3 stages of increased brightness in a highlight like this, and they're typically applied to pull accentuation towards a hard point, like the corner of an armor plate or a weapon. You'll also most often see additive edge highlights applied over a gradiated surface, with the intensity of the highlight adhering to the direction of the blend. Although that's not a 100% rule, it's just something that I've found to be quite a common stylistic choice for most painters. Now, reductive highlights are the far more common and popular type of edge highlights. We still see an increasing scale of brightness here, but each time the colour is stepped up, the line width also gets smaller. So these are typically used to frame a shape and are the iconic heavy metal style of edge highlight. It's worth noting with this type that whilst you will absolutely see them often just framing a flatly coloured surface, the higher end look that you'll see some people able to get from them is often achieved still by using a couple of blends. Typically a shadowy downward gradient on the main shape being highlighted, or a touch of feathering on the first and thickest highlight to make it look like less of a hard jumping colour. And it definitely bears mentioning that the two already explained paradigms of edge highlighting that we've just gone over are certainly not the only way it can be done. It's not an exhaustive rundown of edge highlighting. You can mix both of those styles together, and you often see that done. I personally will sometimes do a combination of the two on the same volume of a model, where I'll lay an initial thicker framing highlight and then a thinner, brighter one that's only painted towards the point of accentuation. There's a bit of room to experiment here and develop a personal approach, and I definitely encourage you to do so. So now that we know how to thin our paint, how to load our brush, and what we're trying to achieve, the next thing we need to go over is how we actually apply that to a miniature. What's the technique? It should be fairly obvious that you want to be tackling all of these techniques with a brush that has a perfect point on it. So if your current brush is kinked, hooked, or flattened at the tip, chuck it out and grab a freshie. Also, please don't use a tiny brush. There'll be just no space in those belly hairs to keep your paint wet and flowing nicely. You'll end up with lots of short, jaggedy lines. A size 2 or 3 is typically what I reach for, but something called a rigger brush has a really nice fine point but still enough of a belly to supply some good flow, and I'm starting to find that rigger brushes are a really good option. So with all of that considered, there's going to be 2 main ways that we actually go about putting down our edge highlights. In areas where we have a hard edge to work from, we're likely going to take advantage of that by using an additive edge highlight. So we can conveniently use the side of the tip of the brush to get a perfectly straight line that is of a consistent thickness, and just continue to make this lighter towards our point of accent. But of course there are also going to be areas on every miniature where that just isn't possible. You just can't reach with the side of your brush, or there's not enough depth or a hard enough edge to do it with, and we effectively have to freehand the line in there. This is also going to be the case if we want reductive edge highlights. We're just going to be forced to freehand them in most cases. So in these cases, the best advice is firstly to always paint in a downward stroke towards yourself wherever possible. It always just seems to be the path of least resistance in terms of letting your hands do what they naturally want to do. However, when we have to paint a curve or just can't get a good downward angle, we'll need to learn to ride that tip. This is why having the right brush and good anchoring matters so much. It's all been leading up to this point, friends, so breathe slowly, stay relaxed, and if you need to, take a couple of practice swings like a pro golfer would. You'll be surprised how quickly you can become competent at this. And also, don't forget, if you cock up, you can just paint up to the line with your base colour. It's also a cheeky way that you can thin that first line down a bit if you think it's too thick. You absolutely don't have to get this right on the first try, so there's no need to be nervous. Okay, So we did it. We got a miniature finished. Let's take a look at what we've managed to do. Okay, so let's not pretend for even a second here that this is easy. You're gonna have to practice edge highlighting, you're gonna have to hone those skills. They will frustrate you sometimes while you're learning, you will get mad. And honestly, this is kind of why my personal style doesn't really lean into that whole heavy metal thing of just edge highlighting every single edge, because it's just not very enjoyable to paint that way. It's very time consuming and it feels like a lot of work. But that said, having the skill to edge highlight is still worth practicing. There's going to be things that you want to do where being able to edge highlight is going to really help you. So if just from watching this video you take something away from it that makes you feel a bit more comfortable and a bit more confident with edge highlighting, I consider that mission accomplished. And if you do find that you've gotten better at this as a result of practicing it this way, take some time to celebrate. Give yourself a pat on the back for leveling up in one of the actual hardest techniques in all of miniature painting. So on that note, I'm going to leave you to get some practice in, but please do let me know in the comments below if there are any other sort of isolated singular techniques that you'd like to see analysed and taught over in this way. I'd love to make some more videos of this kind if that's a thing that you want to see. So until next time folks, happy hobbying, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye for now.